Hello, welcome to Undisputed Boxing. We're doing another history video. The burning question, just how good was David Haye and where do you rank him amongst the best, the best British boxers of all time? I'm going to hand this one over to Rick. He's done his research. All right, Rick, where does David Haye figure? Does he go into your top 10 Brits of all time?
Oh Christ!
Right.
Hitting me with that straight away. Well, let's walk through his career a bit, and then let's answer that at the end.
All right.
Try to remind ourselves and stop at little areas to see what we recall. So he had quite a long amateur career. 83 fights, losing 13, I think. But you have quite wacky amateur careers, don't you? You often hear of big numbers like that.
Yeah,
it's not unheard to have quite a few losses at amateur, and he did win a world silver medal, but never went to the Olympics. He failed in a to qualify for the Sydney 2000 Olympics. So he had a long amateur career, but he didn't. I wouldn't say it wasn't glittering, should we say, or maybe not as glittering as you would have thought, considering the professional career he went on and had. So he turned pro in December 2002. And on his 11th fight, he copped his first defeat to Carl Thompson, who obviously was a kind of former WBO fighter. He lost the title to, what's his name from Sky Sports?
Johnny Nelson.
Johnny Nelson. So yeah, obviously Johnny Nelson, I think, had tried for a title 3 or 4 times, and yeah, he went in and beat him, and then obviously was undefeated, I think, for another 9 fights. So I think Carl Thompson had seen probably better days at this point, but he was still a dangerous fighter, and KO'd Haye in the 5th round. So if your 11th fight to get knocked out isn't really a great start to a career. So probably in 2000, by 2004, he was thinking, well, I didn't do tons in the amateurs, and I got beat in my 11th fight, even though it was to a former world title holder. I don't even have many memories of that fight. I think I've watched it live, but I have watched it obviously since, and I think a lot of it was fatigue as well. And obviously, a lot of fighters come through the ranks and they just take that level step too far. You almost want testing fights to almost get into a bad situation, get through it, and if you go too far, you get into a bad situation against someone who's just not going to let you off the hook, and that's what seemed to happen here. I don't know if you got memory of that.
I haven't actually. My earliest memories, I'd obviously heard of David Haye, but my biggest or my first kind of memory was the Enzo Maccarinelli rivalry, which I'm sure you'll probably come on to. That was obviously billed as a bit of a 50-50, which is probably a little bit unfair on David Haye. But yeah, no, I'll let you pick back up because you'll probably come to that.
Yeah, so he was with obviously Frank Maloney at this time, and then he went on he had a few kind of recovery fights. You got to get your career back in online, and then he started going through a little bit more your traditional steps. So he picked up the European title in 2005 within about 45 seconds, and obviously he was then really showing that he is an exciting fighter. He goes for the kill early. That's what he tried to do against Thompson, but got found out when he didn't knock him down. He had a cheeky heavyweight fight. I didn't realize this, so I did a bit of research in 2007. He had a cheeky heavyweight fight, which he won. And he made a big thing about it, but I didn't write down who it was against. I don't think it was anyone of any note, but he was just almost, I think at that point he was showing he was quite clever at getting the limelight. doing those things. He was almost saying, "Hey, I can fight at any weight, and one day I'll be up there and stuff." That same year, obviously, his real big breakthrough of winning the WBA, WBC, and ring against Mormec in France.
Yeah.
And I think he went into this as a underdog, mainly because of he showed he's vulnerable, and he'd never fought someone this decorated before. And this wasn't just like someone who won one of the belts. He'd been around for a while. He's got 2 of the belts. He was seen as the number 1 in the division, and really he was doing this thing again where he wasn't covering the gaps. He was just going straight up. But I think him and Adam Booth had developed a plan, and obviously that plan worked because in the 7th round he knocked him down. I think Haye did come off the floor on that fight. I think. You got memories of that?
Been trained by Adam Booth.
I don't think very early on, but by this stage he was being. So that really threw him into the limelight because I wouldn't say Mormec was a household name in the UK, but a mixture of David's personality, the way he fights, the way he looks, and the fact he's going to be probably the number 1 in the division in his backyard suddenly propelled Haye into kind of another level, and that's where he was kind of crossing over to some degree. Because I don't think you'd have had tons of watching that fight, but the next fight against the next year against Macronelli, I think you would have got a lot. I think that was pay-per-view, and I think that's the first fight I remember watching with you, or one of the first fights.
Yeah. So what year was this?
2008. So it's when you were in Chiltern.
Okay, yeah, so I've moved to Manchester. Yeah, may have been, yeah. And then it was a great fight.
And this was Sorry, go on.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say Macronelli was with Warren, and I think at this stage Haye was starting to promote himself, I think. Haye just saw it as that they're cashing Macronelli in. And Warren was very much like, no, we feel we can really beat you. And I mean, it was billed 50-50, but I don't remember feeling it was 50-50. I think, Macronelli hadn't got to the levels of beating a Mormec in his backyard.
Yeah.
And I think the only thing that kept it 50-50, that kept doubt in your mind is you've seen Haye down a few times in his career and also stopped. So you get him on the button, you've got a chance. He wasn't a complete fighter because he didn't have that granite chin.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that made him exciting. I mean, he was such an explosive fighter. I mean, I was kind of I think I do remember back in David Haye at the time. Obviously, didn't know a huge amount about him at that time, but obviously from what I'd seen, research, I thought, he was going to be the one that would do the business. But yeah, I mean, I think, was it a stoppage in the 3rd round? How did the fight go? Remind me.
Yeah, it was 3rd round. I think it, came out and Haye was very aggressive, but I think he'd learned not to overcommit like he did in the Thompson fight. I think he just knackered himself out, and he was a lot more complete fighter at this stage. And then I think he got back once, and then he got back up, and then he went down again, and I think it was a right hand that kind of finished it. And 3rd round KO, and that was it. He added the WBO to his WBA, WBC, and really at that stage he'd done only what Evander Holyfield had done, which is to he hadn't done everything Evander Holyfield had done, but he was on the way to kind of matching Evander Holyfield, of obviously unifying the cruiserweight division. he had the world title at heavyweight match, Holyfield. But yeah, that was his kind of cruiserweight area. How do you see him just chopping his career in two? How do you rate him in the cruiserweight, history?
Yeah, I mean, it's he was, well, undoubtedly. I mean, if you unify, in any division, you're regarded as the consensus number one. I mean, that's a very, it's an amazing feat, really. You could be very proud of that. But obviously, I think he always had those ambitions to move up to heavyweight. But pretty much did everything he needed to do at cruiserweight. It's funny though, the cruiserweight division is really, it's regarded as in some ways as the kind of the unglamorous division. One for the boxing hardcore that only really follow it, and I think that's why that a lot of the time they always sort of like to step up to heavyweights, try and get some of that cash out basically. But yeah, he did everything he needed to do at cruiserweight, and obviously I was very excited for one, because at the time Vladimir Klitschko was kind of ruling the heavyweight division, didn't really have a rival as I saw it, and it had actually become very boring, the heavyweight division. I think David Haye, with everything that he had to offer inside the ring and outside the ring and the glamour, I really thought that was potentially going to be a rivalry that would simmer. And I think his first heavyweight fight was against, was it Monty Barrett?
Yeah, 2008. Yeah. So the same year as the the Enzo. And so how would you put, say he was at his prime when he beat Enzo and that, and obviously when he went to heavyweight, the injuries started to come and stuff. But how would you have seen him against a cruiserweight Johnny Nelson, cruiserweight Holyfield? Sometimes it's easy to say, oh well, he did everything he could and he unified. You also have to, when you're looking at how good someone's career was compared to the people, you have to kind of bear in mind how good the quality in the division was at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I try not to get drawn into debates on who was better when you're comparing, different eras. David Haye came sort of after Johnny Nelson. Johnny Nelson came after Evander Holyfield. I do think Johnny Nelson is one of those fighters that, this is all due respect, he probably overachieved for his probably natural boxing ability or talent. Johnny Nelson actually lost his first 3 professional fights. He was fighting at the Ingle gym under Brendan Ingle.
He always said that he was he was a boy in a man's body, and he said, when he was going for those other world title fights, he was doing stuff in the gym which should suggest he shouldn't have lost any of the world title attempts that he had, but he just went in and he just was a boy. Yeah. And he kind of froze, and you can see the performances are very odd.
Yeah.
He then went on and achieved. I think he was always world title material. It's he went on undefeated for about 9. I think he defended it 9 times, and that's when you question, how good the division is, or you cherry picking too much. But
I think the difference between them all, I guess,
that was his cruiser.
David Haye was sort of a lot more exciting to watch. His fights were electric, and I think that's what made him, the star that he was. And he brought, everything to it. He spoke well, looked great. The ring walk, coming into Luther Vandross, the Union Jack, glittery, shorts. He just, he had it all. He was box office. Johnny Nelson, I think, his style as well was never that great. He just kind of always did like enough to get the win and get it over the line. Whereas, David Haye was obviously, he liked to finish the show. He liked to close the show, and he was so explosive, had dynamite in both hands. I'd say probably put a tier or 2 above Johnny Nelson for me. Yeah.
And he was, he was just, his stance was exciting. He'd have a very low lead hand, which potentially made him vulnerable, but always kind of like a crouching, ready to pounce position. And there weren't many fighters that kind of fought like that, really. And there's obviously Adam Booth, and you see a little bit now from a lot of Adam Booth's fighters that kind of stance, and just even was kind of exciting because you always felt something was going to happen at any moment.
Yeah.
Rather than sometimes upright boxers that just do the jab. And he obviously had, you know, power in both hands, but obviously bigger, devastating right, but he was quick as well. You know, he was quick with power and combinations, and worked the head and body, but he was more of a head hunter because he wanted to close the show, and there's no better way of closing the show than chinning someone, I suppose. So then we move into his heavyweight career, which started in 2008, which you mentioned the opponent. 2000, so he had a couple of fights. In 2009, he was going to fight Vladimir. Well, all the talk was about Vladimir because he had 3 of the 4 belts, and Vitaly had the WBC.
Yeah.
And actually, the Vitaly fight was signed for 2009, and Haye ended up pulling out with a back injury, and it was the start of Haye having quite a lot of injuries, and a fighter like him, who is explosive and that can get some of these injuries. And also, Haye was, for me, never a natural heavyweight. He had to put on bulk.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you put on bulk and fight and train that bulk, you're putting more pressure on the body that it was not designed to take. It's all right if you're not a fighter and you're just going around bulky, you're not really putting pressure, but when you're fighting, you are. And I think that was a big thing. But that kind of fell through. I mean, I think that would have been. I'm kind of glad that didn't happen. I think he would have definitely lost that fight and could have got chinned in that fight if he'd fought Vitaly. He went on to fight his brother. But he was, you know, Vitaly was probably, I mean, there's probably another video, but I think he was the better fighter of the 2 brothers and also the more aggressive one. And he would have not have had this chess game that he would have found that he would have probably been, he would have been, you know, it just annoyed him trying to do that. He just wanted to knock his head off. And I think he would have gone after him, which would have left him open. But I think Vitaly always had a better chin than his brother as well.
Yeah, he did.
But anyway, the following that he was meant to fight Vitaly, he went on to fight Valuev, who was a weird looking bugger, I think 7 foot something. And with Haye being quite a small heavyweight, a bit over 6, but he wasn't like a 6'7", 6'8". He was 6'3", I think, Haye. Fought Valuev, who was, you know, it was Bill David versus Goliath. And it was over in Valuev's neck of the woods. What's your memories of this?
Well, I remember this very well, actually, because I was at a house party. It was kind of a barbecue / dinner party, but then it's one of those that kind of turned into a bit of a house party. And I remember asking, and it was in Manchester, and the guy whose house it was, he was quite wealthy. I basically just talked him into buying it. I think he was into his sport. He's more of a football fan, but I was like saying, David Haye's fighting for the world title. Any chance you can put it onto, you know, you can buy it and we can all watch it. Managed to convince him and a few others as well that were kind of interested in watching it. And I mean, it wasn't a great fight, to be honest. It was very awkward for Dave. You know, the build up and the narrative was all quite cool and everything. You know, David versus Goliath. You know, it sold obviously well, but as a spectacle, he never really kind of got near him, and Valuev just kept on pouring him off with the jab. I think he rocked him in the 10th or 11th round. David Haye rocked him with that right hand, where he kind of got a little bit unsteady on his legs. That, from memory, I haven't watched the fight back for obvious reasons, but that is the biggest memory that I have of him really kind of troubling him. And actually, I don't like saying this, but I don't know if he won the fight, to be honest. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think he this was my first fight I ever watched via the internet on just pressing update and refresh. So I was in Vietnam when this was going on, and that wasn't being shown anywhere in Vietnam. Couldn't get any radio going, so it was literally just BBC Sport refreshing each round. So that's even worse than radio. Obviously, since watched it, I think. I mean, it's weird when you go into that last round. I mean, that they were saying that they don't think Haye's got this. The commentators were saying it's close, but not sure he's got it. And in his hometown, really don't think he's got it. And I don't think it was wide on the scorecards, but it wasn't split. I don't think it was a split decision. So I think all three had him for a couple of rounds. The only thing I can think of is I think his best success, there was a lot of body to aim for. And I said that Haye wasn't a body puncher. That night he became a bit more into one because the body, he couldn't miss because he was that big. And, you know, if it's a scoring shot, that may be the way he got over the line, just keep hitting the body. But I feel that he felt he had to get more success because he did go looking for him towards the end, which did suggest that he felt he needed to win the last few rounds. But yeah, he became, at the time, what only Evander Holyfield had done, which was to unify the cruiserweight and to win the WBA world title. He then went on to fight Ruiz the next year, which I went to. I don't know if you went to it.
I was, yeah. We went there together, yeah. And, great memories.
There's a big group of us.
Yeah, there was.
There's a big group of us, but we weren't sat in the same. There was like four and then four somewhere else. Yeah. So I only remember the four I was sat with, but I knew the group. And then he went to fight Harrison, and I know I was with you that night because we were in some bar in Manchester, and that was a bit of a joke. And that's when Eddie Hearn came on the scene, and did a pay-per-view, and it kind of, you know, didn't do very well. Well, I think it sold well, but I think it went down as a bad, you know, not a great fight. And Harrison didn't really put up much effort, and he was already in trouble in the press because of, I won't repeat it on here, but certain comments, how he said it was going to be quite one-sided.
I remember. I know what you're talking about,
I'm trying to speed up here.
I know, it's dragging on a bit. How long have we done?
He then fought the Klitschko. Sorry, we're just over 20 minutes now. So,
all right.
2011 was the Klitschko fight. And you know, he blamed the toe. Quickly, what were your kind of memories on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, very disappointed with his performance on the night. I do think he made a mistake in mentioning the toe. Whether he could have maybe tried to get a rematch or what, I think that was definitely his best move. But it was on foreign soil. It was in Germany, wasn't it? I believe. Anyway, it was on. It was away from home. Yeah. Klitschko had everything his own way. The pick of the ring and referee. You know, he was basically ruling the division. But yeah, very disappointing. It was just a bit of a damp squib, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's weird. Haye though is very exciting. Some of his biggest moments weren't great fights. When you kind of look back, he then had a good rivalry with Chisora that went on for a while. That was obviously from a press conference, and then turned into an actual fight. That was quite a good fight, and the build-up was quite interesting with the glass in between them or whatever it was. In 2013 and 14, he was meant to have two fights with Fury, but pulled out. Both times with a kind of cut, and then the second time with a shoulder injury. Who do you think at the time would have won that fight?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I don't know. I think at the time I was 100% backing David Haye, because at that time I was one of I wasn't totally sold on Tyson Fury at the time. I think he had beaten Derek Chisora, but it was a really kind of a dull fight. And he got a very lucky decision against big bad John McDermott. And I just thought Haye was a level above, to be honest. I thought he'd have problems with his jab and his reach advantage because Tyson Fury was towering over David Haye. But I think I would have backed Haye at the time. But I guess history would tell us now that Tyson Fury probably would have beaten him.
Yeah, it's tricky because I think Haye, you know, he was in his last throes of his career really, and I think he would have taken more liberties than he did against the Klitschko fight. I mean, I think one criticism, I know he blames the toe, but I think he could have gone after him more, and he was just terrified of getting caught. And I think he'd rather have I think he would have rather have lost points than have got cleaned out. Yeah. And I think unfortunately that was his and trying to win the fight. I think with Fury, he would have gone for it more, which made it interesting. But you're right. It shows that when Fury's gone up the levels, he's found a way.
Yeah.
So I'm not convinced either way, but now I know what I know. Probably Fury, but I do think Haye would have made more of a fight of it than he did against Klitschko, because I think he'd have had less fear. And then there was quite a big break, and then he came back and fought two bums, and then fought Bellew twice. And we all kind of know what happened there. Basically, just came back and cashed out for a couple of years. Just on that, how would you have seen the Bellew that fought Haye if it had happened 10 years earlier that fought for the Haye that fought Matt Cronelli?
I think if they'd have fought at cruiserweight, I think David Haye demolishes Tony Bellew, if I'm honest. I think Tony Bellew is one of those fighters. He had a bit of a kind of Indian summer, didn't he, with his career, because he had fought at light heavyweight, fought at cruiserweight, just wasn't really that just didn't do anything amazing. Stunk the place out against Nathan Cleverley, and had those terrible fights against Isaac Chilemba. And it just goes to show actually what an amazing job Eddie Hearn did with him as a promoter in terms of, you know, picking the fights, the route to, you know, back to world title contention, and then obviously stepping up to heavyweight. It was a bit of a masterstroke, I think, from Eddie Hearn and Matchroom, not to kind of, you know, blow their trumpet. But I do think, you know, in the end, Tony Bellew probably overachieved in his career, whereas David Haye maybe slightly underachieved. He just didn't quite do it in those big moments against Klitschko. But yeah, I think David Haye in his prime, I think he would have smoked Bellew, to be honest. And I actually backed Haye to beat Bellew even at that stage of his career. And obviously I was grossly wrong, but I mean, David Haye was riddled with injuries at this point, and he was limping.
Yeah, see, my thoughts are the same. Is that I don't see it as one-sided, I suppose. I think I saw enough from Bellew in the final years to say actually he knew what he was doing around the ring, and he I think he got Haye at the right time. Don't get me wrong, but I think, you know, the Usyk fight was a good thing for me, because I know he lost, you know, midway through, but I actually thought he was giving Usyk a hell of a fight until then, and just got knackered basically, probably because he was coming back down to cruiser. You've got to do it for 12 rounds, but I do think he had quite a lot of ability by then, and just ring craft, and just knew some tricks. So I think if that Bellew had fought Haye 10 years before, I think Haye would have got to him. I don't think it would have been a blowout. I think they would have at some point got into an exchange.
Yeah.
But I also think Haye would have fought differently. I think it was I think Bellew would have fought differently. Bellew, I think, backed himself on speed in the exchanges, because he wasn't scared to exchange with Haye, I noticed, in both fights. But even the first fight, he was happy to exchange because he felt he's got the speed. I think it'd be more defensive against the earlier Haye.
Yeah.
And therefore it'd gone on a bit longer. But I think at some stage Haye would have got through to him in straightforward, would be my view. So sorry, we've rambled on, or I've rambled on a lot on this. So you know, how good do we actually think his career was when we compare him? I mean, not many Brits have done that in cruiserweight and stepped up to heavyweight. And I think also it's hard because lots of Brits some Brits have unified and then stepped into another weight division and won. But there's just something about doing it at cruiser and then going into heavyweight and winning that just seems to eclipse anyone doing it further down. If you do like middleweight and then go up and win a belt at super middle, it's not quite as big as going to cruiser and above. So for me, he doesn't reach Evander Holyfield's position, because, you know, he didn't really fulfill that much in heavyweight. He won a title, but how many titles did Holyfield win? He won numerous, and he was in some big fights that he won. You know, he was clever when he got to heavyweight, and he got a world title, but when he really stepped up, like you said, he kind of let things down. So I don't know if I would put him in the top 10, going back to the original question of fighters. I think more his heavyweight career. You know, he won a belt, and fair enough, but it wasn't a convincing win. And then what did he go and do after that? You know, who did he really have on his record?
Yeah.
You know, if he'd have fought Fury and beaten him, Fury went on to do what he did. That's a big name, but it feels like a half-hearted career at heavyweight, and that sounds bad because he won a title, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it was probably just indicative of his body shape, like the way his body was and his fighting style. He was never going to have a long career. As soon as his body starts to let him down a little bit, 33, 34, things aren't quite moving as well. And because he's such an explosive fighter, he's not like a Bernard Hopkins where he can just start to change his style a little bit, adapt, use his ring craft. You know, he fought that kind of one way, and that's what, you know, kind of suited him.
I mean, I think two things he was obviously lacking for heavyweight. One is a bit of reach, which there's nothing you can do. But I just wish he had probably a bit more trustworthy chin.
Mm.
I think he always knew deep down he knew he didn't have a granite chin, and I think that meant when he went to heavyweight against certain fighters, he was very risk averse.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I mean, you know, the only big fights he had at heavyweight, let's be honest, were to get the title, and I think he was wary then as well of getting clocked.
Yeah.
And then the Klitschko fight where I think if he trusted his chin, he would have gone after Valiev more and maybe chinned him in like middle of the rounds. Against the Klitschko fight, it would have gone for it more.
Yeah. Yeah, that was what I felt after the Klitschko fight. He just didn't, and maybe that was you know, contributing factor to his injury. But there we are. Now, I'd probably agree with you that I wouldn't quite. He's very close to the top 10, but I wouldn't quite. I think I could probably name a top 10 that probably wouldn't include Haye, unfortunately. But yeah, all right, cool. Thanks again for the education, and thanks to everybody for listening. Please let us know your thoughts, comment section, and yeah, thanks for listening.